G'day everyone, welcome to another video by myself, Andrew DFT. And of course, this is part 2 for the TITANFALL 2 Cosplay helmet tutorial. So I will quickly say this is not the final part. Unfortunately, during the editing I did realize I still have a lot of footage to cover, and rather than make this a 20-minute video, I thought I'd put it into 3 equal sections. So in the third, we'll go ahead and cover the visor and all the final details that go on the top. But of course, now in part 2, we're going to go ahead and actually put on all these individual sections to build up the helmet and actually have something you can wear on your head. We'll also go in and add in all this sign detail. This is of course going to need to be added to bring up some more 3D perspective, and the design actually has it, so it's probably good we put it in there. And of course, if you haven't started yet, you can obtain the templates via the link in the description box below. I have added a smaller scaled version for those younglings that wish to jump along and give it a go. Otherwise, let's jump in. Alright, so when we left off in the previous part, of course, we had the helmet looking like this. But let's go ahead and start to add some more parts and sections to the top. So grab the section that looks like this, the template with the triangle and all the curves and whatnot. Now this is actually the back part of the helmet. So you're going to need to transfer 2 of them, being sure to flip the template at least once to give us the left and the right hand side. You can now clearly see that we have an indicated bevel line on all 3 angles. So we're going to go with and bevel in on an interior angle 45 degrees towards the textured side, those 3 edges. So that way we have some pretty intense kind of like slopes going on. Now what you're going to do is give it some nice heat and then bend it quite severely to give it this kind of like turtle shape. It should be bending in 3 ways on all the axis. Then once it's cooled, you can lay it into position and you want to mark out where it actually ends. It should slot in pretty well. If it's not curving properly, you are going to need to reheat it and make sure it curves in with the general slope of the foam. Then you can put that aside and we'll actually jump in and grab the main section here. You're going to need to tape the parts together, of course, because they're across 2 different pieces of paper, and then you can transfer it onto the foam and cut out the giant slab that it needs. Once we've got that, you're going to give it a lot of heat and really heat the bugger up, because this is going to have to bend across the tip. But you're going to use a table or a flat edge to kind of give it this shape here. You'll notice down the bottom it has a bit of a straight and then it kind of curves, so if you can match that, that would be perfect. Then what we can do is grab the hot glue and we can start gluing these pieces into position. You want to make sure that you do have the right piece pointing towards the bottom. You should know pretty quick, but for the most part, if you've heated it up well, it should all start to piece together. It should all sit in there relatively well and kind of curve and give it the nice seams required. If you're not getting the seams matching up properly, it might be because you haven't beveled it sharp enough. Now we've got to build the middle section that holds it all together. So cut out the template and then transfer it onto foam, being sure to flip it so you get the 2 sides. Now you'll notice we have a bevel line indicated here. So go ahead and make sure that you've applied it to the right hand side by placing the template on the foam and figuring it out. And then go ahead and bevel off those edges. It should be only on 2 sides, but do please make sure that you have the right sides before you actually go and bevel them. Then apply some heat to it with the heat gun and then bend them rather severely. You want to have this nice kind of curved effect, and what we're doing is really it should just slot in and bend over to arch together these pieces. Now because it's all lined up pretty well and hopefully you've cut it out pretty straight, it should fit in there perfectly. Now you will need to apply glue to each section and kind of hold it there before you apply glue to the next, because you want to really make sure this is sturdy, because otherwise it will rip apart. If you're using art cement, it might be a bit better, but especially for hot glue, make sure each section is kind of well sealed and cured before you move on to the next, but for the most part it should glue together perfectly. At this point you might also be noticing you have some rather big seams, but don't worry, I'll be showing you a technique later on that will allow you to cover those up, so that way no one will ever see them, so you don't need to worry about your seams too much, as that'll all be sorted. Now onto more triangles. Of course, this is the triangle section that holds the front bridge of the helmet together, so go ahead and cut those out like we did with the previous, flipping them so we get 2. Then you'll notice here we have a indication, of course, for a bevel line. Now this is only on 2 sides, so be sure you indicate clearly which sides you need to do, then go ahead and take the action. Once you've done the beveling, you can go ahead and heat the foam up relatively well, and like we did before, you want to bend it so it fits into the shape like that. Because it's all measured pre-construction, it should fit in relatively well, and like we did with the previous version, you want to make sure you've lined everything out. Now you will notice here I am marking in a designated area. This is the point where the corners meet. This is of course going to be a section which we're going to go in with a 90 degree and then a 40 degree to create a nice hinge effect to actually bend it over and give the helmet a bit of an edge, a crisp cut to it. All you need to do is apply some glue and it should allow that section to stay steady. And you'll notice when we turn the helmet around, you'll have this nice kind of edge. It kind of highlights it just enough because we put the hinge in, but what it will allow it to do is to wrap around a lot cleaner. So once you've got those side panels in and glued all the sides, it should stick in relatively well, and you can see here where it's starting to match up from where we added that hinge before. Of course, being sure that you're applying the hot glue rather scarcely to make sure you don't get any overflow, but it should slot in 100% perfectly. If it doesn't, then it's up to that 99 that I mentioned before and that 1% wiggle room that you're going to have to apply. Once it's all set in and you can see it's all cured, then you'll notice we have a bit of overhang. Simply just connect the lines like you can see here and then cut off the excess. Okay, so now on to the more important detail. So what we're going to do is grab these two templates you can currently see on screen. We're going to lay them onto the foam and transfer them, being sure to flip the template so we both have a left and a right side. Then what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at the template and break it apart. Now we can see this indicated line here is a bevel line, but it's also going to be one that's a bit more intense than the usual. So we're going to break the template apart and we're going to line that line in, pretty much, and then we'll add a depth line. This can be about a quarter of the way through the foam, and then we can sync it up and we can prep our nice sharp craft blade and cut straight through it. Now this is of course a difficult part just because it is a lot longer, so you're going to have to find a way to cut it out using a blade. Now you'll notice we do have more indicated bevel lines that surround the perimeter of the edging. So you can draw those in either manually or cut apart the template and then add a depth line again about a quarter of the way through the foam. But before we go ahead and bevel, we're actually going to score some lines, or at least put the lines in there. So you can cut out the internal shapes from this template and then transfer them in using the template as a negative space. Then what you can do is of course score the template. If you don't know how to do this, this is literally running the craft blade through the skin of the foam so it breaks it. You're not cutting all the way through the foam or even trying to. Now what you can do is you can go ahead and do the beveling, which you're used to, and just cut off those perimeter edges to make it a bit more rounded. Then next we're of course going to do relatively the same process to the smaller piece. Now it is a smaller piece, so you're going to have to be rather careful where the blade is and where your fingers are. So go through, break the template apart, apply the beveled line where needed, and add the depth line as well, about quarter of the way through, just to keep it all cohesive with the other piece we did. And of course bevel off that edge and then use the template as a negative space and cut out that section and then score in the line. Now you know how to score, that shouldn't be too much of an issue, just do take it careful and make sure the blades meet up all the edges. Now once we've done both those segments, you can literally just glue them straight into position. They should slot in perfectly, with the bottom one having a tiny bit of overhang going over the lower jaw. Alright, so we've got one tiny piece of detail which we're going to add to complete this part 2. So what we'll do is of course pretty much the same process as all the previous pieces. Grab the template, transfer it onto foam, flip it left and right, and then what we're going to do is make this a bit thinner. So we'll add a depth line, sorry not a bevel line, a depth line about a quarter of the way through the foam, and then simply trim it in half. Once we have that, we can then break the template apart and transfer those three square rectangles in there and then score them to make sure they're all complete. Now we are going to have to add a bevel line as indicated on the template, so that shouldn't be too difficult. All you're going to do is line it in there and then slice it off. Being careful, as the foam is relatively thin at this point, you don't want to destroy the detail. And then you can simply go and glue it into position. If it doesn't slot in perfectly, you can cut off a few millimeters from the bottom part, the non-beveled edge side, and it should lay in there perfectly fine and, well, looking rather good. So that's it. Hopefully it's coming along rather nicely for you now and you actually have something you can wear. Remember, foam is very malleable and the way I built it is the same way you're going to be building it, but tiny millimeters might be off. So it's going to be up to you to adjust and change when necessary. But for the most part, the templates work like 99%. It's up to you to make it work that extra 1%. Whether you need to trim a few millimeters or do something a bit harsher or bend it a bit further, that's going to be up to you and how you go through the construction. But that's just all part of creating something unique. But I won't recap what we're doing in part 3 because I already mentioned it at the beginning of the video. So we'll just jump ahead and go straight into the next one. Thank you for watching, guys. Consider subscribing if you're new here and like the video if you enjoyed the content. Otherwise, until then, catch you later.